I think it is clear to believe in the power of ideas.
Fresh thinking to the Manhattan Institute.
Good evening. I'm Howard Cusick, Vice President for Policy Research at the Manhattan Institute, as well as Director of the Institute's Social Entrepreneurship Initiative. That's our program for nonprofits and philanthropy, made possible by the generous support of the William E. Simon Foundation. Our initiative includes, among other things, our annual award program for startup nonprofit leaders, as well as the annual William E. Simon Award for Lifetime Achievement in Social Entrepreneurship. And it includes tonight's event, the annual Simon Lecture on Philanthropy and Social Entrepreneurship. Anytime those with an interest in management generally, or nonprofit management specifically, gather, it's appropriate to cite the work of Peter Drucker, widely considered the father of modern management. It's especially important to do so this year, the 100th anniversary of Peter Drucker's birth, celebrated last month all around the world. It was Drucker who may have been the last consultant to get General Motors on the path to prosperity. That was in 1946. When he published his book, Concept of a Corporation, based on his 2 years' research at GM. It was around the same time that he also began to address himself, however, with his customary insight and originality to the topic of nonprofits and philanthropy. He wrote in 1990 that 40 years ago, when I first began to work with nonprofit institutions, they were generally seen as marginal to American society, dominated by big government and big business, respectively. Today we know better. Today we know that the nonprofit institution is central to American society, and indeed is its most distinguishing feature. But Drucker was no cheerleader. He cautioned that nonprofits need to learn to use management as their tool, lest they be overwhelmed by their management challenges. They need management so that they can concentrate on their mission. He added crucially in his 1990 classic, Managing the Nonprofit Organization, Practices and Principles, little that is so far available to the nonprofit institution helps them with their leadership and management challenge, and because it's been specifically designed for them. Most was originally developed for the needs of private for-profit business. Little pays attention to the distinct characteristics of the nonprofit or its central needs, to their mission, which distinguishes them so sharply from business and government, to what do results mean in the nonprofit world, to the strategies required to market their services and obtain the money they need to do their job. There are few people in American life who have done more to rectify the problems that Peter Drucker there identified than our speaker tonight. Tom Tierney, too, began his career focused on the for-profit world, serving from 1992 to 2000 as the chief executive officer of Bain & Company, which he first joined in 1980 following his graduation from the Harvard Business School. But like Drucker, he understood the extent and importance of America's nonprofit sector and set out to create an organization to provide advice about strategy and leadership matters to both nonprofits and the foundations that provide their funding. That would be a consulting organization that could fill the needs that Drucker identified, address itself to the special challenges of nonprofit management and philanthropy. And so it was when he was at the top of his game, as it were, at Bain. Tom changed roles. Spinning off from Bain, the nonprofit organization, he now heads the Boston-based Bridgespan Group. Its founding was a reflection of his understanding that a sector as central to American life as one which includes everything from the Red Cross to Habitat for Humanity to Harvard University cannot thrive as the poor relation of for-profit firms, which fundamentally have different missions and measures. It needs its own infrastructure, its own support, its own advice, its own ways and means to identify and nurture talent. Bridgespan, along with its companion organizational leadership organization, BridgeStar, are providing just those things for many of the nation's most important nonprofits, particularly for young organizations striving to go to the next level of influence and effectiveness. More broadly, however, Tom Tierney, not unlike Peter Drucker, has emerged as a practitioner intellectual for the nonprofit world. His writing has appeared in the Harvard Business Review, the Stanford Social Innovation Review, Philanthropy Magazine, and elsewhere. You can find a number of his papers linked to the Manhattan Institute's Social Entrepreneur website, and I hope you look at them there. He's reflected both on how nonprofits can set practical goals and measure meaningful results, and on his topic tonight, higher impact philanthropy, how it can identify and reinforce the good habits of successful nonprofits and avoid squandering the promise of the millions which generous Americans donate annually to charitable organizations. He has, in other words, thought carefully about both elements on which a Simon lecturer is asked to reflect: social entrepreneurship and its vital companion, philanthropy. Tom Tierney is a native Californian who received his bachelor's degree in economics with highest distinction from the University of California, which also honored him at Davis, which also honored him as the outstanding graduate in his class. He lectures both at the Harvard and Stanford Schools of Business and chairs the Harvard Business School Initiative on Social Enterprise. He serves as a director of eBay Incorporated, as well as the Nature Conservancy, the National Center for Public Policy and Higher Education, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and the Hoover Institution. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the 2009 Simon Lecturer, Thomas Tierney.
Thank you, Howard. I should begin by calibrating Howard just a little bit. I'm no Peter Drucker. I read Peter Drucker. I aspire to serve as best as possible with the gifts I've given. And people like Peter have been influential for, I'm sure, many of us in this room. My topic tonight is how philanthropy shortchanges America. I want to provide a little bit of a vantage point on that because I am an optimist. And that vantage point begins with Bain & Company. Bain & Company, as Howard mentioned, has been focused as a management consulting firm, later on as a venture capital, private equity firm with spin-off of Bain Capital, on impact, on results. And when we launched Bridgespan in 2000, I stepped down from this organization with 2,000-some people in 20-some countries to join a charity with 4 of us in a cubicle as a full-time volunteer, but I had a title of chairman, which is terrific. I left that behind with one objective that myself and my co-founder Jeff Braddock had, and that was to truly help other organizations and the leaders of organizations in the social sector deliver greater impact. All about impact. We're a nonprofit organization, and the incentives, therefore, are not to grow, they're bonuses, the incentives are impact. When we launched Bridgespan almost 10 years ago now, and we've had a terrific decade. We've learned a lot, we've made many mistakes. We've had the privilege of working with hundreds of nonprofit organizations, dozens of terrific philanthropists, and developed all kinds of ideas and worked with other thought leaders in the sector. And we are bridging, it turns out, not just the business and the nonprofit world, which was our original intent, but also bridging donors and the organization they support. And as many of you know, when you launch a new venture like this, you think you know more than you actually know. And we didn't realize the power of those two bridges, of combining business ideas, nonprofit sector realities, and donors and philanthropists' desires to deliver impact and achieve whatever it is they're trying to achieve, and the organizations that they support and how those organizations really work. What I'm going to do tonight is flag some of what we're learning about delivering impact from a donor's perspective. Because it turns out it's hard. And this has nothing to do with the motivations of donors. The folks we know, the philanthropists, the foundations, want to do the right thing. They don't want to do harm. Nobody wants to waste their money. In fact, I think we could all characterize philanthropy as an extraordinary American virtue. It's deeply seated in our national culture. The voluntary action for the public good. And that goes way back. It has its roots in the founding of our country. It has its roots in the great religions of the world. So this passion, this mission of using my resources to serve others is not just philanthropic. It's much broader than that. And yet, I believe, after 10 years in this space, that philanthropy does shortchange America. So what do I mean? Well, I'm going to put the spotlight on a slice of philanthropy. 2008, Americans gave over $300 billion to nonprofit organizations. I'm going to focus on the 10 or 15% of that comes from high net worth individuals and their foundations, whether it's through a donor-advised fund or an individual foundation. High net worth philanthropy is interesting because it tends to be higher profile, often bigger bets. People are using not just money, but influence and relationships, their personal brand. They're using other tools, if you will, to drive impact. So it's an interesting segment to explore when one asks, is America getting its money's worth for this philanthropy? It reminds me when I started at bank many decades ago, marketing was very, relatively speaking, unsophisticated, the whole area of marketing. And the adage was, we know we spend X dollars on marketing and half of it's wasted, we just don't know which half. And I think in philanthropy sometimes that also applies. We know half of it's not generating results, we're just not quite sure which half. So what's going on? I'm going to drill down on two sets of root causes. One set of root causes I'll label terrible truths. And those are the harsh realities of the social sector and how it works that any philanthropist who wants to deliver impact has to confront. There's not a lot we can do with that except understand it, prepare for it, deal with it. The second set of realities relates to bad habits. Think about these as self-inflicted wounds, which philanthropists do not have to be burdened by, but often are. What are those terrible truths that, at least from our experience at Bridgespan, confront any well-intentioned philanthropists? There are three. I'll describe a little about each one. First, all philanthropy is personal, deeply personal. Second, capital markets, when it comes to philanthropy in the social sector, are irrational. Third, in philanthropy, excellence is self-imposed. We'll discuss a little bit about each of those three. Philanthropy is propelled by all kinds of motives. I went to UC Davis. I was so happy to get into Davis. My father was a factory worker. I was even happier to get out of Davis. After trying to study chemistry and almost flunking out, I did really well in tractor driving. Davis is an ag school. And, it was terrific. I was so happy to be. I give back to Davis. I don't hold Davis accountable for results when I'm asked to give. I give back to Davis. That's a type of philanthropic motive, isn't it? Or, if I'm on the board of an organization, a nonprofit organization, and we're doing a capital campaign, and the chair of the capital campaign rings me up, that person wants me to do my share. So I do my share. We all do our share, sometimes more than our share. Some people enjoy recognition. Why is it buildings have names on them? That's a philanthropic motive. Nothing wrong with that. The point is there are lots of different kinds of motives, personal motives, around philanthropy that actually don't have to do with the return on impact, the social impact generated by every single dollar. I was with a billionaire not so long ago, a multi-billionaire, who's setting up a billion-dollar foundation. And this was late at night. He had a couple of glasses of wine. I'll call him Mike. I said, Mike, what are you trying to accomplish? He's got a board with his wife, 3 kids, lawyer. What are you trying to accomplish? He said, honestly, what is it? What's your scorecard 10 years out? He said, I want to bring my family together. And he went on to talk about how his kids were estranged, how he'd been working his tail off, and he wanted to bring his family together. Now, well, I have a solution that won't cost $1 billion. Nevertheless, philanthropy is personal. It's deeply personal. It's not clinical. And that makes it messy. And it wasn't just messy for Mike. Mike's wife had her own ideas. It turns out his kids had their own ideas. Even the lawyer had his ideas. They all had ideas about what this foundation was going to do and how it was going to do it and what success might look like. So philanthropy is personal. That makes it messy. Which leads me to the second terrible truth. Capital. In the financial markets, seed capital is what? The highest risk capital. You demand a higher return if you're starting up something new because the probability of success is lower. As you get to the second round of capital and the third round of capital, and somebody's scaling something that's pretty well proven, the returns go down because the risk is going down. Growth capital is cheaper. Money follows success. In the social sector, does that work? If we have a proven nonprofit organization that really does have results, does capital flow to that? Do philanthropists say, there's something that works, let's double down on that? Of course not. It's personal. Another billionaire story. Fellow wants to fund his foundation on K-12 education type issues. Let's call him Fred. Fred, how are you thinking about this? Lots of work has gone with the K-12 for decades. Decades, lots is known. This fellow's a full-time CEO. He has not been thinking about K-12 other than for his kids. He said, I've read what's out there. I've talked to a few of the people. They don't know anything. I think I can figure this out. Really? Now, I'm overstating a little bit, but not a lot. So he's going to go do his own thing. He's going to start up another nonprofit, more nonprofits, more ideas. All of that's terrific at one level, but where's the growth capital? So the capital markets are not rational. Philanthropic money, much less government funding, does not follow success. It follows a bunch of other stuff, which means delivering results is by no means automatic when you're trying to scale something that works. Problem number 3, terrible truth number 3, which in a way might be the most fundamental truth that you say, of course, once you recognize it, but when you come from business, you don't recognize it right away, at least I didn't, and that is excellence is self-imposed. The power of marketplaces is phenomenal. It's phenomenal. When the Gap puts a purple sweater on the store shelf at Copley Plaza in Boston, they know that day how many of those SKUs sold. Retail sales after last Friday were known within 24 hours. Exactly. And if you want to break that down by store and by SKU, all that data is you know exactly what's going on. Marketplaces tell you what to do. If your products aren't selling, you're changing your products. If your business isn't working, you change your business or your lunch, your toast. Remember New Coke? Remember New Coke, those of you that are around, years of consultants and focus groups and market tests and everything you could possibly do. Here's New Coke, we're putting it out there. What did the market say? In the social sector, New Coke would still be on the shelf. It would still be on the shelf. People would be saying, we really like this product. And the philanthropist that funded it would be taking credit for New Coke. And the people who received the funding would be saying, keep that funding coming, because boy, people are really, really loving that New Coke. There's no marketplace to direct you. And in the absence of that direction, you can make mistakes, number one. And number two, you can get lazy. The interesting combination in philanthropy, because there are no direct competitors and no paying customers, there's no consequence of mediocre performance. You don't see executives, staff of philanthropies being fired because the impact was a B- instead of an A. Doesn't happen. It's kind of a cross between the Galapagos Island and Lake Wobegon. The Galapagos Island, no predators. No predators. Lake Wobegon, all the kids are above average. You won't believe this, it's true. At a board meeting once, a very sophisticated board of folks, late in the day, tired, so I'll give them that. We started talking about their portfolio of grants. So now tell me about your bottom quartile. And one of the people piped up, and again it was late. So we really don't have a bottom quartile. I took enough math to know there's almost certainly a bottom quartile. But you can, in the absence of marketplace kind of begin to feel like in philanthropy there is no bottom quartile. Everybody wins. It's always good. And of course, the feedback distorts that. How common is it for somebody you give money to say that you made a mistake giving them money? That's not exactly a natural reaction. So what happens is the feedback is distorted, highly positive. So, point being, excellence is self-imposed. If you want to deliver impact with your money in philanthropy, you have to decide you want to do it. It's like exercise or reading, keeping your mind sharp. It is self-imposed. Nobody is going to make you do it, and no external forces will embarrass you or force you to do it. Now, as a business guy, I say, so what? That sounds like, pull out the violin. In business you have a lot of tough stuff you have to deal with. You have to deal with tough customers, tough competitors, disruptive technologies, and all kinds of things. So don't tell me about these terrible truths of philanthropy, because the terrible truths of business are just as bad. Just as bad. True. What's the difference? In business, you're aware of them. In business, if you can't confront them and deal with it, Darwin works, you're out of the gene pool. In the social sector, in philanthropy in particular, you do not have to confront them. You can absolutely behave as if those terrible truths didn't exist. And if you do, you will not deliver the impact that your money deserves. So, philanthropy routinely shortchanges America, and we see this constantly, by underestimating the degree of difficulty. By saying, how hard could it be to give away money? Carnegie figured this out. It's hard. If you want impact, it is not hard to write a check. That's the context in which philanthropy operates for those philanthropists intent on results. Now, is it doable to overcome those? Absolutely. But unfortunately, some of us make it worse. So what are these bad habits that take a tough situation and handicap us? There are 5, at least that I've observed. And I'll say a few remarks about each one of these. I'm sure we could create a longer list if we wanted to. I don't think we could create a shorter list. What's the first one? I'll call it fuzzy-headedness. What does fuzzy-headedness mean? Well, it's not asking the simple question, what's an A+? The question I asked Mike, what's an A+? What's the center of your philanthropic bullseye? What is success? What are you trying to accomplish? Not save the world, not end poverty, not stop global warming or whatever it is. No kidding, what are you going to hold yourself accountable for? It's a powerful question. What are you going to hold yourself accountable for? It's really different than what are you going to do. Absent clarity around your goal, everything else kind of falls apart. Imagine a football team without a scoreboard. Nobody's keeping score. You're just playing a game. You can play the game, never win, never score points. The second fuzzy-headedness relates to if you have a goal, if you're aggressive enough and rigorous enough and clear-minded enough for you and those other folks around you, because remember, philanthropy is personal and it's almost always done in groups. For that group to be clear-minded about its goal, how are we going to achieve that goal? There's a New Yorker cartoon, which is a classic, and it has professorial-type folk poised in front of a blackboard, all these algorithms and equations on the blackboard, and the fellow's sitting there, the Einstein-looking fellow sitting there, just pointing with his pointer saying to the other guy, and here a miracle occurs. An awful lot of philanthropy requires a miracle. Land Trust. Great Plains Land Trust. I'll disguise this a bit. Saying, you know what? We are going to raise a capital campaign to save the grasslands. Terrific. What percentage of grasslands are currently protected? 2%. What's the goal? 10%. Terrific. Capital campaign, if you succeed your wildest dreams of the capital campaign, what do you get? 2.2%. Just now, for the simple-minded, how do we get from 2.2% to 10? Well, people are going to follow us. People are going to see the momentum, and they're going to put in more money and buy buffalo and all these things. Which people? Well, we're not sure. You know, people that care about the grasslands. Which people? What are the underlying assumptions here? And you push, and the underlying assumptions are the blackboard. A miracle is going to occur. We're going to get to 2.2% maybe. They didn't, by the way. They're going to get to 2.2%, and then a bunch of stuff's going to happen that is wishful thinking. There's a lot of wishful thinking in philanthropy. Fuzzy-headedness is problem number one. What's bad habit number two? Flying solo. This is a structural, behavioral problem related to philanthropy. It's personal, and people think about it, surprise, as their own money, and they're going to do it their own way. I mean, one of the great ironies of philanthropy is that individuals can actually accomplish very little acting individually. You get things done by acting with and through other folks. Whether those are other donors, whether those are grantees, whether those are partners, government agencies. We often don't build upon the existing knowledge. The illustration I made earlier. We don't like to fund as philanthropists other people's deals. Collaboration in philanthropy often means, okay, I'll put $1 million into your deal. When you call me, I'll give you your $1 million, and later on when I call you, you're going to fund my deal, my nonprofit. And that's kind of reciprocity. That's not collaboration. So we like to play alone in philanthropy. And that means we aren't clear about what our role is in this ecosystem of other philanthropists and government agencies and nonprofit organizations. And you can take, whether it's K through 12 education or whether it's an environmental issue, whatever it happens to be, you're almost never, very rarely anyway, going to be able to solve something unilaterally. So, problem number 3 is flying solo and liking it. Bad habit number, that was 2. Bad habit number 3, underestimating and underinvesting. How many of you have ever remodeled a kitchen, a bathroom, a garage? How many of you who have done that? Raise your hand if you came in under budget and it got done faster than you thought. Okay! Somebody find out who that person is and how he did it. You know, everything takes longer and costs more. Everything takes longer and costs more. And in the fuzzy thinking world of philanthropy, sometimes philanthropists grossly underestimate how much things really cost. So they wrong size their grant. And there's a pathology out there that exacerbates this. And the pathology kind of works as follows. I'm running a nonprofit. I need $1 million for this initiative, this after-school program. I've done the numbers. It's $1 million. I've never raised $1 million. $1 million sounds like an amazing amount of money. So I say to myself, we're going to ask for $500. I go to my donors. Donors look at this and say, gosh, it's kind of risky. We'll give them $100,000. I now have $1 million initiative with $100,000 of funding. Do I hit it out of the park? Of course not. I kind of do so-so. The donor says, you're only doing so-so, we better not give them too much more money. And you get in this starvation cycle where a problem that required $1 million solution gets a $100,000 solution, and then it gets a $50,000 solution, and the problem persists. This happens all the time. So one part of the underinvesting is just not getting it right, what it really takes. The other part of the problem, though, is not being willing to step up. Not being willing to say, you know what, this is going to take $20 million, and it's going to take 10 years, and that's what it's going to take. And let's not kid ourselves. There's a corollary, a flip side to this, which is how is the money spent? 80% of philanthropy funds programs. And I don't know if 80% is the right number or not, but that leaves 20% that is unrestricted funding for the organization. Now, philanthropists, like any of us, hate wasting money. Overhead feels like wasting money. And organizations are out there that rate nonprofits on overhead. And less is assumed to be better. Okay, so let's just assume less overhead is always better. What implication does that have? We should all fly the airlines with the lowest maintenance costs. It's better. We should go to the hospitals with the oldest, fully depreciated equipment. It's better. We should send our kids to the absolute cheapest schools with broken down buildings and teaching assistants, no real teachers, they're more expensive. Of course, those are inputs. Cost is an input, not an output. Is there bad overhead? Of course there's bad overhead. Excess rent for a nonprofit is bad. How about a chief operating officer? How about a chief financial officer that really can do the books? Is that a bad investment? Oftentimes in our philanthropy, we underinvest in the basic capacity. We think we can deliver A-level results with a C-level team. Boards of directors do this all the time. We encounter this all the time. Outstanding chief executive, growing a nonprofit organization. She's just doing fabulous. She's raising money. Burning out, the board won't fund a chief operating officer. So why not? Well, it's going to cost $120,000 a year. That is an input to delivering the impact you need. But donors don't like, oftentimes, to fund the capacity necessary to deliver the results they really want to achieve. Underestimating and underinvesting. Bad habit 4, nonprofit neglect. Now, what does this mean, nonprofit neglect? I was talking to a bunch of foundation folks the other day. This was a large group. And the conversation came around to, how about if we have a conversation with foundations and their grantees together about what's working and what isn't working in the relationship? And we talked about that for a minute, and then one of the people stood up and said, we really just like talking to ourselves. That those nonprofits we like talking to the people that have money. And that's kind of interesting. And it wasn't being flipped. It's very easy to neglect the reality that a philanthropist is never better than the organization or individuals that receive his or her money. Never. Never. You can't give money to a team that scores C's and give yourself an A. Now, sometimes if you're doing your own philanthropy and you're kind of investing and doing your own stuff and you are the team, that's different. But the moment you start giving money to other organizations, those organizations better be what they need to be to deliver the goods. Jim Collins, when he wrote Good to Great, and subsequently Good to Great in the Social Sectors, had this phrase, first who? Who's on the bus? Nothing matters more than who's on the bus. I would say nothing matters more than having the right person in the right job at the right time. Anybody who's in business, anyone who's started a business, we all know how incredibly critical that is. Business people take this for granted. Philanthropists forget it sometimes. You're betting on people. You're betting on organizations. And you better not only pick the right people, but you better nurture the right relationships. There's a hidden cost of capital in philanthropy. And it's pervasive, and it's phenomenal, and if you could ever actually capture it, it would draw a clear line of sight to one of the ways that philanthropy shortchanges America. What's the cost of capital? The cost of capital comes in a bunch of forms. It's a philanthropist who thinks he or she is a better strategist at after-school programs than the folks running those same programs for 25 years are. So they disrupt the strategy. They can take a perfectly cogent, great strategy and give them money to distract it. I was in this conversation, but another conversation, you can't think this stuff's real. And a wealthy fella and his wife talking about this topic, about how he was being a little too hands-on and trying to jam the strategy, and he actually didn't know what he was talking about. He's trying to change the behavior of the nonprofit he gave money to, which of course you can do if you can write a big enough check. You can do. And that woman turned to her husband, she was a crackerjack. She said, honey, just because you're rich doesn't mean you're smart. That worked. So one kind of disruption or cost of capital that is nonprofit neglect is disrupting a strategy. And then sometimes the reporting requirements and all the other stuff. Point being, you're never better than the organizations you give money to, and you better treat them that way. Last bad habit, and I'm going to wrap up. Chronic complacency. We had a phrase at Bain, which we noticed in big corporations in the old days. You'd see a division in a big corporation that just didn't seem quite that aggressive. They were making their numbers, and that was that. And we labeled that satisfactory underperformance. Satisfactory underperformance. They could do a lot better, but they're just not. And in philanthropy, there's this satisfactory underperformance. There's this complacency. Aren't we doing fine? As opposed to asking, how could we do a little bit better? What's working? What isn't working? What is in the bottom quartile? There's one. And why? What are other people doing that we could help? What can we bring to the table besides money that might generate impact? Asking those kinds of questions, that takes time. It takes time. It takes work. It takes courage. It takes a willingness to say, you know what? I'm not perfect. I've got to learn. This is hard. So let me wrap up. Does philanthropy shortchange America? Absolutely. Is it intentional? No, of course not. It's not intentional. Is it avoidable? In large part, at least to some extent, yes. First of all, it's hard. There are those terrible truths about philanthropy being personal, and they're messy. You know, the capital markets are irrational, so even if you get something that's really working, it won't necessarily attract more money. Excellence is self-imposed, so you just have to be vigilant and disciplined, and vigilant and disciplined. Those are true. It's hard. But we have self-inflicted wounds that make it worse. Those bad habits, fuzzy-headedness, flying solo, underestimating underinvesting, nonprofit neglect, dissatisfactory underperformance, complacency that can seep in over time. Now, the downside of this, if I put my pessimistic hat on, is not so good. 75% of America's foundations are created in perpetuity. What does this lead to? If you can't overcome those terrible truths and you start falling into those bad habits, it leads to mediocrity in perpetuity. Mediocrity in perpetuity. Now, I'm not a pessimist. I'm an optimist. And so let me give the optimistic note to end on. Right now, I say right now, in the next decade or two, America has an unparalleled opportunity, an amazing opportunity to drive forward and dramatically increase the impact of its philanthropy. Why do I say that? British Museum's been at this 10 years. One of the most fundamental trends in the last 10 years is philanthropists imposing higher levels of excellence on themselves and their grantees. A desire for results. A desire for how are we doing and how can we do it better. And you see this from the Gates Foundation all the way around. It's messy, mistakes and this and that, but people want to achieve results with their money. And by the way, as near as I can tell, I think living donors who are actively engaged in their philanthropy have a greater desire to get results because it's their money. And so we have right now an era of living donors stepping forward, some in their 40s, some in their 70s, saying, I want to get impact with my money. It's going to be messy, but I want results. That's a powerful theme that you couldn't find 15 years ago to the extent you see it today. Second thing, downturn last year. Terrible. Terrible for philanthropy, terrible for the social sector. Will continue to be for a while. But you know what it did? The bright side of that is it forces people to ask, how do we do more with less? How do we do more with less? Our resources are down, but the need's up, the opportunity's up. How do we do more with less? That creates an energy, a creativity around innovation. And it's not just the last year or so. We've seen innovation in philanthropy over the last decade that is partly driven by this desire for impact and partly driven by new people coming into the sector. We call them bridgers, people from the business world, government moving into the social sector. It's extraordinary, and that brings in more ideas and more energy. The other reason I'm an optimist is around the projections for wealth. No matter how you look at this over the next few decades, there will be a massive amount of money that will move into the social sector. My Irish grandfather said there are no pockets and shrouds. Near as I can tell, that's a fact. Money has to go someplace. When you model the future, here's the interesting fact, which is a little bit below a base case. All the money that went into all the foundations in the 20th century, which, by the way, there's pretty good data on, X. The money that has entered foundations, not entered foundations, and is likely to enter in the first 50 years of this century. So today through 2049. 100 years versus 50 years. Constant dollars. First 50 years of this century will be 10x in constant dollars the entirety of the 20th century. You can get to 20x without making too many big assumptions. You can get to 7x or 8x. You can't get to 3x or 4x. That means what? We have huge influx of capital over the next couple, 3 decades. We have talent coming in. We have people engaged in giving while living. We've got more innovation and more ideas. So I'd like to end by saying, I think this is an amazing time. I think philanthropy in the next decade is going to progress further than it has in the last 2 or 3, maybe the last 4 or 5. And it's very exciting, and I hope to be able to work with many of you, and I hope all of you, and those of you that are not here and involved in this, will just do your best to set that bar very high, because America needs it. Thank you.
We've got some time for questions. I know Tom welcomes it, and the rules are always the same. Keep it in the form of a question, wait for the mic, and we start with Jerry Orstrom in the back row.
Thank you very much, Tom. You have expertly described my family's 60-year-old foundation.
I'm not going to ask which part.
And I only wish that the rest of them were here to hear you. Speaking of family foundations, I've long concluded that there is no real legitimate, that the concept of family in family foundation has no real legitimacy from an ethical perspective or a practical perspective. I sense that you may feel similarly, but I welcome your views. And to what extent can a family foundation do something legitimately for its family?
There are many questions that are a long time ago that have no answers. That may be one of those, but I'll respond as best I can. Philanthropy is personal. So there are families. Another illustration is a Boston family that's, I think, in their 5th or 6th generation of their foundation, and they have 80 family members involved now. And they think it's a great gift. 80 family members giving away a few $1,000s a year each, but it's kind of a family reunion 3 times a year for the board meetings. And it actually is a forcing function for interaction, for generational transfer of ideas and stuff. Is that bad? I'm not wise enough to judge whether that's bad. Here's what I can say. That the evidence is, if you want to have impact, just like in business, you have to do a few things really well. There should be a core. None of us, I'm not an athlete, I can barely walk, but people that play sports, it's very unusual to find somebody who play golf and tennis and ping pong and baseball and football all equally well, right? You play a sport, you're good at a sport, and that's the one you concentrate on. The complication of often in family foundations is everybody, because it's personal, wants to do their own thing, and they end up with a lot of small things. And the grants are wrong-sized rather than right-sized. You can have impact with $5,000, you can have impact with $100,000, you can have impact with $10 million. But making the tough decisions about trade-offs often can't happen. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, it depends on the motive. I've seen some creative suggestions, or something people will do. They'll say, all right, we're going to have a foundation strategy for our family foundation, and 70% of our funds are going to go to that highly focused, results-oriented strategy. 30% is going to kind of be discretionary and decided upon by the individuals. So people can serve on boards and make their contributions. But I don't think there's a right or wrong. I mean, we are in a very interesting time because the number of family foundations will be growing. And there are some donors who exclude their family. In this town, Chuck Feeney, Atlantic Philanthropies, they were our first benefactor. There's the largest spend-down foundation in history. And he has no family members on the board. It's just Chuck. Now, his offspring have their own little foundations, but not involved in that one. That was his decision. The Packard Foundation, Dave and his wife, their 4 kids were on the board. The son didn't quite connect. He went off with his pool of money. 3 daughters stayed on the Packard board. With the generational transfers here are really complicated. And just because you want it to happen doesn't mean it happens when one passes. Lots of evidence of that. It's hard to wire these things in multiple generations. Anyway.
Yes, gentleman right there on the...
One thing that came out of this that is sort of new to me is I've been asked to give grants to new organizations. And I'm thinking maybe you're better off making a 2 or 3 year loan with a nominal interest rate. And the write-offs will probably be pretty high if they don't make it. those who make it can pay the loan, and you can give them more money. And isn't that a pretty good way to incentivize people to really reach out and get new donors and do well by making it a loan instead of a grant?
There might be two parts to that question. One is the financing or the financing vehicle or financial arrangement, and the other is how do you feel about seed capital versus growth capital? For startup organizations, loans can be complicated because they're short on cash and they can't see. The use of PRIs is increasing, program-related investments, and people are starting to use balance sheets. The Gates Foundation is public is starting to use its balance sheet to guarantee debt and things like that. But it's complicated for new nonprofits. I think there's a really fundamental question for all of us around if we have a foundation and we're excited about a certain field, we want to create new organizations or help drive success in existing organizations. That is a fundamental question, and there's not a right or wrong answer. But in general, it is better to take an organization that is working well and have it serve twice as many kids than it is to create new organizations. Up until the downturn last year, it's just an amazing statistic. In America, for a decade, there were about 98 new nonprofits created every day. Net. Net meaning they were still there at the end of the year. They were filing Form 98. Now, that's civil society work, and that's in a way phenomenal. I mean, most of them don't have staff or anything like that. They're just new nonprofits. So you can't really argue. The question is, out of that, how do you build the ones that are really working? And so if a strategy is to seed more of those, Bill Draper, is Bill involved in this? Is Draper, Richards here? Yes, somewhere. Okay. So Bill, I know, is an old friend, and they provide seed capital. And that seems to work pretty well for a few years, getting nonprofits going. 3 years of capital, but it's cash, it's not loans.
But what about loans even to an existing organization?
People are starting to do that. People are starting to provide more, if you will, balance sheet kind of things, usually to the bigger organizations.
There seems to be a lot of nonprofits get started and look to the government to get funding, and a lot of their goals and focus seems to be, in many cases, not that productive. They're more interested in just getting the money from the government and creating organizations that really don't make that great a contribution. That's what I've observed. Is that a large part of the nonprofit organizations, or just a few?
It's a great question. This actually lends itself to analysis, and there's some research that Bridgespan's done. And part of our mission as a nonprofit is to provide very rigorous content, to help other people learn from and benefit from. We've done work on funding models. One of the pieces of analysis that was pretty interesting is analyzing all the nonprofits in America from 1970 through a couple of years ago that started up and got to $50 million, which is big. There were 144 of them out of 200,000. So first is that, I don't know if that ratio is good or bad. A business would probably have a higher success rate, and is 50 million a magic number? No. But what's interesting is the way that they did that from a funding perspective was by and large pretty focused. So the natural customer was the government, because they're doing agency-type work, and the government's the next. Others, it was membership. If you're an environmental organization, it might be membership. Others might be foundations. And what we discovered is, in fact, that the organizations that scaled, maybe they stumbled into it, but they became eventually pretty clear-minded about who their core funding customer was. Just if we had businesses, you have a core customer that you really rely on, and there's a bunch of others. So I'd answer the question by saying, people tend to chase after money no matter where it is. And that does not seem to be a wise strategy if you want to scale an organization. It does seem to be, looking back in time, that the government is an essential funder for certain types of organizations, but not for all types. And right now, with the stimulus money and other things that are going on, just the shortage of private capital, people are chasing every dollar they can find. They're chasing high net worth philanthropists, right? So anyone is receiving how many greater number of inquiries than you did a year ago? Well, that doesn't work. So the answer is you can't chase money, whether it's government money or private money. But on the same side, there is if you're trying to grow, there probably is a core set of funders that are going to help you do that.
Yes, Tim Ferguson.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you're a donor and you want to measure whether your recipients are in the top quartile. What's an example of how you might score that? Do you try to measure them against other philanthropies trying to achieve similar objectives?
It's a great question. Over the last decade, one of the most profound trends, and I think it's driven by this desire for impact, has been measurement. And in some cases, you get social scientists who want to do randomized control tests. So, after school program, kids are in the program, kids that aren't in the program, what's happening for 5 years? Those are expensive to do. At the other extreme, most of the time, if you went to a program officer in a foundation or a head of a foundation or even a grant maker, they'll have a pretty good sense of these are the real stars and these are the real dogs. Most of us know that. Now, we might not be able to differentiate the middle of the curve, but we know who the stars are and we know who the dogs are. If you think about any of you run organizations, you knew the top 10 or 20% of the folks, and you were always, if you were paying attention, clear about the bottom 10 or 20%. And in terms of getting better, how do we get better? As near as I can tell, you get better if you understand who the stars are and who the dogs are, the ends of those distributions. If you don't know that, if you don't have enough data points, if you take what's an illustration? It's been a home run. KIPP Academy. Say Don and Doris Fisher launched KIPP Academy, right? They're funding that first $2 million. In those early days, if you had asked people in the ed space, how was KIPP doing? They would have said, pretty good. They wouldn't say it's proven. But they were taking kids out of the same socioeconomic groups, putting them in schools, and they were outperforming. So say, jury's out so far, but pretty good. So asking the right people their honest point of view externally can help. One of the things that does not happen, and it's sad, because it could happen, is telling truth to power. When you're giving away money, it is very hard to get people to tell you where you're screwing up. If those people have a vested interest in getting money, that doesn't mean other people will. So I think there's the key in this is applying judgment. It's not black or white. We try to get measurements in the social science. It's not black or white. It's not the quarterly profit reports. I could measure Bain's utilization every single day. I knew our cash flow every single week in 20 countries. It wasn't always accurate, but I thought I knew. We don't know that. But you can apply judgment. And if you're not sure, ask who are the 10 people in the field that I work in whose opinion I really trust and who will tell me, no kidding, this is what's going on.
We've got time for one more question. Yes. Is that Adam? Yes. Go ahead, Mike. That's Rob.
Tom, I have a question about your terrible truth of the irrational capital market, and in particular the difficulty of attracting growth capital. Is that an inherent feature of the social sector, or is that something that where we could see new institutions arise that could solve that problem?
You couldn't pick people with easier questions. You've been very consistent here. Adam, let me answer that by saying there are great impediments to it, but there are also some interesting success, at least apparent success stories occurring right now. So what are the impediments? I don't know if any of you have been involved with United Way. In the old days, United Way, you gave in the office, and whatever they did with the money, they did with the money. You trusted United Way to do what was right in your community, and that's the way we did it. Later on, United Way couldn't raise money that way. It had to have donor choice. And pretty soon it wasn't just donor choice for kids or health or pre-K, whatever it was. It was actually donor choice so you could pick a nonprofit. And the United Way had to provide that choice to individuals. That is a little bit of evidence that philanthropy is so personal. Giving is personal. People want to choose. Aggregation of capital has not worked in a large scale. Period. People have thought about it. People have tried to do it. People cite Warren Buffett's gift to the Gates Foundation. That's, in some ways, you could say that hasn't been replicated since. Maybe it will be. But they had a unique relationship. So has aggregation of capital to make markets more efficient actually worked on a large scale? No. That said, Edmund McCullough Clark, local foundation here, focused on youth development, launches a growth capital campaign for 3 nonprofits. There's Youth Villages, Nurse Family Partnership, and I can't recall the third one. Raises $120 or $30 million. A number of foundations and individuals to take those 3 proven models, hands down, proven results, every way you can, perfectly measurable, to scale. That's a big deal. Climate Works out on the West Coast with, I think, $500, maybe $1 billion of committed capital from Hewlett Foundation, and Packard, and more, and others like that to address climate change. So you start to see some of those things kind of happening. Now, 100 million, 130, 150 million, is that large? Yes. Is that large relative to the amount of aggregation that might be useful? No. One of the things that, if I were predicting, I would say is going to happen in this next generation of philanthropy is we're going to see more real collaboration because the problems are so big and so intractable. Nobody has enough money to solve a problem. You have enough money to give a scholarship to a young person to go to college. You do not have, nobody has enough money to fix the school system. And even if they had enough money, it would vaporize, right? Because the money isn't just the answer. So this notion of collaborating, whether it's public partnerships, private partnerships, or whether it's capital, that, I think, that theme of, it's been, frankly, if we don't hang together, we're surely going to hang separately. That theme of we've got to work together on this, and we've got to put our own personal desires a little bit in the back seat and put the beneficiaries, whether it's the kids or whatever it is in the community you're trying to address, in the front seat. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that some of these experiments, Clark one is a great example, that drew a lot of attention. Some of these experiments will prove that, if what you want to do at the end of the day is get impact, scaling what works, which takes many people pulling together, is a very powerful vehicle. Not the only vehicle, but a very powerful vehicle to do so.
On that hopeful note, please join me in thanking
I think it is clear how fortunate we are to believe in the power of ideas.
Supply the common sense and the fresh thinking of the Manhattan Institute.